Order.
Yeah.
Have a roll call, please.
Mike Davenport.
Here.
Dan Nicholas.
Here.
Terry Pavicic.
Here.
Rick Pavinato.
Here.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Here.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have a quorum. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, next item on the agenda is reception of visitors. Do we have anybody here that wants to speak tonight? All right, seeing none, we will move on. First item on our board workshop, tentative budget. Item A, 2019-2020 budget. I think we're going to hear from Mr. Stalen.
Yep, and returning from past meeting.
Yes, this is a tentative budget. I appreciate you putting it on the workshop agenda as an action item so that we can get it out in the community so that we can approve it formally at our September meeting without rescheduling that meeting until a later point in the month, because you have to have it on display for 30 days. And so we appreciate having this opportunity. Put a little bit of pressure on us to get it ready for this meeting. But we made it. So first thing here is with the fund balances. It is a balanced budget, meaning that the operating revenues of 95 million and the operating expenditures of 92, almost 92.5 million, plus the transfers out of about $2.5 million to other, to the debt service funds are equal. And that means that the 1.5 million beginning tentative fund balance where we were at the end of last fiscal year will be the same point we're at the end of this next fiscal year. The wild card here is a health benefit account, which kind of surprised us. We weren't thinking about the cyclical nature of that account. And we also changed the plan to a calendar year plan, our health plan, which caused us to have a second deductible period, which kind of set us back. But we're going to monitor that. And that 1.7 could go up or down, which could change our total fund balance, which, again, at the beginning of the year with that health benefit account, which is required to be part of the educational fund, $3.2 million, and it'll be $3.2 million at the end as well. And in November, we'll have an opportunity to assess where we are with our health benefit account, and we will set new premiums and or make changes in benefits or react as we have to make sure that that account stays solvent, which it is right now. If we go to the revenues, there's a couple key points. I mean, you've had all the information. I think he's going to make it. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Tony. Property taxes are right on the money. 3.1% is what we expect. We kind of know that because we knew CPI is 2.1% and our new construction was just about 1%. We are collecting some older taxes, which is a good thing because they've been under appeal and now they're letting some of those go. So we should be fine with the taxes this year. Replacement taxes is one that we aren't sure about. We thought they were going to clip us last year, and they actually they paid out more than they said they were going to. So we didn't complain, and we put the money in the bank. Interest income is the big thing on there that's looks great on a percentage per se. So there were years where we had $2 to $3 million worth of interest income, though. Interest rates are still fairly low, but they've grown quite a bit over the last year, and I think I mentioned in one of our meetings that we aggressively went to the banks and told them we need to get more money on our dormant funds that sit in their accounts. And so they did, and we are getting better returns. So that's the big ticket item on this revenue side. Food services, we expect to stay relatively flat, particularly with construction. I think that's going to have some disruption to kids' movement and things like that. So we'll see how that comes out. We were actually notified this last week that Chartwell's is replacing the director of services for our district, which we see as possibly a good thing. The person was watching both us and 88, District 88, kind of splitting her time between the two buildings. We should be getting our own dedicated person now. So that may help improve the program itself in terms of what we can offer kids. Registration fees is only going up because we increased the amount of the fee. We increased the registration fee from $315 to $325, and from the tech fee from $90 to $95. We hadn't changed it in several years, but we approved that earlier. So we should get a little bit more coming in on that line item. Other local revenues is down really expectedly because last year it was higher than normal. It was higher than normal because we're now required to put E-rate, even though it comes from the federal government. The state wants us to classify it as a local revenue. And last year we did the upgrade to the good part of the upgrade in the internet and got a larger than normal allocation of E-rate because it's a reimbursement for technology expenditures. And so that was kind of expected. General state aid came in very well last year. I mean, it's under, but it was higher than some of the areas. Where we got hurt the most was special ed transportation. But we are expecting that to grow a bit this year. And federal aid is down just a little bit because a couple of the grants were discounted a little bit. So overall, 3.2, really close to what we normally expect our revenue stream to be, and pretty solid. If we go to the expenditures. Oh, wrong one, so expenditures. All right, good. Top line salaries and really salary and benefits, we negotiate them as a pair, and so we could think of them as a pair. We might increase benefits more than salary allocation for a particular year. But even when you combine the two of them together, it's about a 3.2% increase overall, which is matching our revenue stream for that year, which is just actually working out perfectly. Purchase services, we only added, back to the salaries, we only added 1.2 FTE, so there was very little change in the total staffing. So 3.2 is our total just on the salary side. If we go down to the purchase services, it really has a bit. Most of it, I think, is coming from the building fund because we normally have purchase services there, of course, but we're doing some heavier capital projects. We combine some of those projects, the lighting in the gymnasium, I'm sorry, not gymnasium, but the natatorium at South. Those are major capital projects, and those require architectural and engineering fees to some degree. The projects that we spent the money out of the building fund this year, so we incurred a little bit more in purchase fees out of that fund. We kind of offset that a little bit, though, if you look at capital outlay and the other accounts and others, just dues and other things, really kind of staying stagnant or dropping. And then the other big ticket item on the expenditure side really is tuition for students that are placed outside of the district. We have very little control over these kids once they're here, but we did a really good job this year. And I'd like to again say Lisa Ballo and the special ed department did a great job of, it's a very difficult when a child is outplaced in their sender district to get them in the school at the high school level because the parents and everybody are thinking that that's the only way to go. But we offer a larger array of services, and we have better specialists or more specialists in certain areas that we can provide the teaching program that's needed for those students in-house. And so we're able to bring some of those kids back, which really saves us a lot of money because outplacing kids is very expensive, not just from the tuition costs, but also transportation costs. And so we're really pleased that we do have more kids coming in than going out this year, so it's going to be higher, and we're hoping that we can hold it at this level and we don't get any surprises. It's happened to us in the past, so we'll get one kid that'll come in, move in district, and it's a $300,000 a year outplaced kid, and so that number can be very volatile. So, but again, our special ed department does a great job in terms of just really looking at what the children need and servicing. The next item is one that, this is the one you flipped up too soon.
Gave away the big reveal.
It's the non-operating funds, and there's a lot going on in this year. For the debt service, this is where those transfers come into. You see the transfers here, 2.5 million. So this is where we're paying for projects, HVAC project at South. We still are paying for the South Norfolk extension to Springside. And those will be coming off the next few years. But we do that with operating funds, which is something that we're really proud of being able to do. But if you look at capital projects, we could have up to $7.6 million of more bonds issued related to the master facility plan next year. Originally, we only slated $60 million, but $66.7 million is a total remaining amount. We may just move that forward and issue it. We're going to time the market again. If you look back up at the debt service, though, you can notice that it's starting with $1.5 million at the beginning balance, and it's dropping to $600,000. A big part of that is that each time we levy taxes for debt service, there's an additional up to 1% added by the county, just to make sure that if we do get appeals or losses, that there's always enough money to pay the bonds. And that grows over time, and we had enough dollars. We had about $1.5 million at the beginning of the year, and in order to take advantage of the low interest rate market, when we issued our bonds, we agreed to do it, or we decided to do it in June. Now, that's typically what's considered to be off-season. Typically, you'll issue those bonds in January or February over the year so that you can get them into the next tax levy, which that date closes at the end of March. So usually it's the first quarter of every calendar year when you issue bonds. And the reason that you do that is because you got to get them into the tax rate so that in 6 months you can pay the first interest payment out of those tax dollars. We hit it in June, knowing that we had excess reserves in the debt service fund. When the rates were very low, we issued the whole issue at 1.8% interest cost after all costs of issuance, legal fees, everything. But the downside, or we only did it because we knew we could pay the first interest payment out of the debt service fund. And we've been, to some extent, criticized by members of the community for not using that money to offset and abate bonds. This is doing the same thing. We're avoiding having to levy $1.1 million in taxes, taking out of the debt service fund, and that's why we were holding it. We still have about $600,000 for the next issuance to do a similar type of thing, depending on the timing. So it's a little complicated, but it's really, actually, I think, a fantastic use of our funds and our resources in the district. If you look at the lower section, the long-term debt, this just shows you what's being paid between the debt service taxes which are levied on the community, and then from operating funds. It just breaks it out for you so you can see where it's coming. And we could issue up to $67.6 million in new bonds, but we have about $11 million in maturities coming off from both some of the bonds we already have outstanding for the master facility plan, and also for other debt service that we are taking from our ed and building funds. And that's the show right there. So that's really what we have on the budget. I don't know if you have any questions. I went through it fairly quickly.
So Mark, the only question I would have is, I'm going to go back, if you can go back to the fund balances for where we started. And again, my only concern or question is the fund balance looks like it's staying the same at 3.2 million year over year, which drops our reserve to 3.4. We've had probably 4 or 5 years of really good economic growth and really good economy. Should we be looking to grow that 3.2 or that 3.4% to 5% while, in anticipation? Because we all know the economy is a cyclical thing. I want to make sure we're prepared for any downturn in the future.
Yeah, well, first, just to be real clear, it goes to 3.4 only because we have the same balance, but our revenues grew a little bit. Yeah. But that's something we can do. We need to discuss it now. But what I'll do is when we do our 5-year projection, I'll try and address that specifically to where we can go. We'll have some of these debt service, these transfers reduced over time, not next year, but in 2022, we drop, I think it's, I did make a note, $2 million. So we have that coming in our future. So what we would do in order to build fund balance, our revenues and expenditures are so tight that it would be cutting some program somewhere or cutting staffing or doing something to create that. And it's on a balance. And the reality is we can run this district with actually 1% of reserve, but 3.5% is just kind of a target or 3% actually is a target that we set out there, said, if it gets down below 3, we need to have a plan to get it back up over that. And so 3 is kind of our trigger for that. So if we hit 3 next year, if something happens and we actually hit 3 million, then maybe we would have to do something in the next budget year. That's why we'll monitor it, throughout the year and
But
see
Mark,
where we are.
you're suggesting that in 2022, the funds that we would normally have been spending to pay down, maybe that goes
Goes
into
away.
that.
I mean, because it'll be paid off.
So that might be an opportunity to build that up higher
Yeah.
Without cutting.
anything.
2022 is the last year of it, so it'll be the 2022, 23 fiscal year that we actually are clear of all of the transfers. Now, we can leave that just sit there, we can let that go in and try and build up our fund balance a little bit and get to a safer, higher position. The good thing about the economy, I mean, it has been good, although the CPI for this year is trending at 1.6. So that's a surprise, really. You think the economy's going like gangbusters, but obviously it's not.
Well, good news about potential
A way to get this,
flexibility in 2020.
right, without having to cut into the expense side, right.
Mark,
Great.
don't we
Thank
also
you.
have a TIF expiring as well in the next?
We do. The Downers Grove TIF is, and I attended that meeting, and it'll be not in next year, 21, but it'll also be a 22.
What's the impact? Do you?
It's about a 1% impact, the Downers Grove TIF. If it stays on track for where it is with the EAV increase, that comes in as new construction. So that's another positive that we'll be putting into the 5-year
So
project.
dollar-wise, what do you?
Well, $1 million.
Yeah.
We have a $95 million budget. 1% is 950,000. So I mean, it would be it's another piece we have that's why we keep building the budget and letting that reserve stay tight, because we do keep looking where we are a couple years down the road and have some positive things there.
Thank you.
Good job.
Question on that. Do we ever look at, obviously we were willing participants in that TIF being created. Now that it's wrapping up, do we ever go back and look at how effective it was? Was it a good thing for us to be involved in? And, just curious.
They're not all the same, but the ones that we've been involved in, except for one out in Oak Brook, there was a TIF out in Oak Brook that I didn't support, just because it was Myers Road and Butterfield, and it didn't look blighted to me. But there's different criteria they use to determine that. But for the most part, TIFs are, if they're valid, they're good for both us and our neighbors and our citizens, because you typically, like downtown area was dropping in EAV, and so a drop in EAV shifts the burden onto the other taxpayers, because we get our same CPI no matter what, right? And so by supporting that TIF, it really has been very successful. 1% coming back to us is a big move. So the downtown TIF is probably one of the most successful ones I've ever seen, actually, because it'll be a big push.
That's saying something, I think.
Well, and so the idea is that it stops the sliding and actually creates an increase in EAV for each of those properties in the downtown area, which helps in the long term. Now, that when we get our same amount of money each year, that means all the taxpayers outside of the TIF are making up that difference, because any new growth in that TIF is not given to us, it's taken from them. And so, and it's used for rebuilding those stores in those different locations in the parking garage and all those things. So I'm not usually against TIFs if they're appropriate. And so we didn't fight that. We didn't ask for them to take money out of that TIF. Sometimes you could do that, but that just slows down the growth and the money that they have for the rest of the
I think it's been
operations.
beneficial. I just was curious to
I think it
get
has been, yeah.
your take on it. So, other questions? I have one on the expenditures.
Sure.
With the capital outlays, so we're projecting to spend less than we did the
Yeah,
previous.
because we've got so much going on with the master facility plan.
Fair to say that potentially, too, that we're able to leverage all that's happening there for us to maybe some of the things that we're doing with the capital outlays would have cost us more if we hadn't been doing.
And we did do that, and
So I'm just
can support that.
as a matter of wanting to get that on the record, I think the effect might be that we're actually getting as much done or more, even though we're maybe not going to be spending as much.
Yeah.
Fair
There's an
statement?
efficiency of scale.
And it's actually, the work's already been done this last summer. The capital outlay in the building fund usually happens over the summer when, the schools are down and when we can coordinate it. And Jim does a great job of looking at the projects with if we have a big electrical program going on, which we do, let's do some more lighting and do the lighting that's been on the list. And that's why many of all $1.2 million for the most part is being spent on projects that are aligned with the master facility plan.
That lighting
out of
at
his
South
fund.
at the natatorium is fantastic.
Yeah, you got to go look at it. It's really
it's great.
beautiful.
So, okay, well, if there's nothing else, this will be an item on the action agenda.
It will. Thank you.
So, next item, deep equity.
All right, I'm going to bring up Rob Lang, and he's got a whole cast here with us this evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I've got something a bit more
sit up
exciting
here.
to talk about tonight.
That was plenty exciting.
So
Take
I'm
that?
glad Mark warmed up the crowd for us here.
Wow.
Why
Man.
don't you guys sit up here?
You want us all to, there's many of us.
Right? There's four?
Chair here.
You want us to sit at chairs?
He gets insulted and he gives up
Yeah,
his
he gives
chair.
up his seat.
Sure.
He's
You
like, I'm
guys
done.
want to come to the
running.
table? It might be difficult to see the slides as we present, but we have some chairs up there. You can all be on camera.
Come on down.
Just
Yeah, welcome
do
to
me
the
a favor
party.
and flip the name tags down. Sorry, that's your name tag. Okay, so we're here to talk you through and explain some of the work that we've been doing around our equity and inclusion programming. I'm excited to highlight the work that we're doing, but I'm especially excited to introduce you to some of our educators who are leading the work here tonight. So I'll give a brief overview of our work, and then I'll introduce them, and they can explain the different components that we're working on. So just to remind you, these are two of our domains for our district goals. The work that we're striving towards is for our student experience, and the pathway that we're getting there is through our staff experience. So most of the programming that we're doing right now is through our staff. We do have an additional piece that we'll talk through tonight, which is student programming, but also with the same goals. This is the quote that we use from the Deep Equity Institute to frame the work that we're doing. The quote says that we are striving to teach and lead in such a way that more of our students, across more of their differences, achieve at a higher level and engage at a deeper level more of the time without giving up who they are. So I want to go a little bit into that last piece down there that says without giving up who they are, so we can unpack that a little bit to understand it. And to do that, we're going to use, I went too far. Tony, you're right, it's touchy. Can you click from there? Thanks.
Skip the
Thank you very
culture.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a slide here that is not showing up. That's okay. But this word culture, and a lot of our work is focused on the culture that our students bring to our buildings, and then the culture of our buildings and what it provides to our students. We're looking particularly at how those cultures interact. And by culture, we're talking about customs, norms, beliefs, interactions, things like that. Sometimes when cultures interact, they complement each other. And so part of our work is finding those areas of complement and leveraging them to make our experiences for students better. And then a good portion of our work is looking where the conflict is at. So the culture of our schools is sometimes in conflict with the culture of our students. And so we're looking at those, and it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of reflection, a lot of unpacking. But our goal is to try to reduce the amount of conflict between student culture and school culture so our students can focus on their learning instead of navigating through that conflict. One quote that we have on that slide is from Zaretta Hammond, who's a researcher around culturally responsive teaching. And what she says is that our challenge as educators is knowing how to create an environment that the brain perceives as safe and nurturing so it can relax, let go of any stress, and turn its attention to learning. So our goal is to help reduce those conflicts in culture so our students can focus on learning rather than focus on navigating those differences. And it all gets to our district mission, which is to provide a caring and challenging environment where all of our students develop as lifelong learners to become contributing, responsible members of a changing world. So those are our 4 key words that we're using around our district. I'd also like to emphasize the all part because the work that we are doing involves all of our adults. So typically our professional learning like this is focused on our classroom educators. We approached it as any adult in our buildings that interact with our students or with our families is important in this, and so all of them are also involved in this work. So background knowledge. We went through this last year when I presented. We have an equity team that's been formed, and it's been meeting for about 2 years now. Our equity team is composed of educators representing different areas of our staff. So we have classroom teachers, we have librarians, counselors, support staff, administrators, representing the adults in our buildings. The team got together and we've been assembled for 2 years, and we worked with consultants from the Deep Equity Institute to learn about equity work, to learn about a process that we can apply in our district, and then to also plan what implementation would look like in our school district. So from that, we put together that one's not showing up either. We put together 3 different components. So one component is that we repurposed some of our late start Mondays. Those were used for PLCs. We're now using some of those for all of our adults to get together and to engage in this work. So that's a required thing. We also have an intensive 4-day workshop in which any of our adults can opt into that. It's 4 full days doing a deep dive into equity work and looking at how they can apply it into their work setting. And then our last piece we uncovered last year, we have some work to do with our students and our students interacting with students and creating a safe environment for each other for learning. So we're going to start a student program in this year. So the people who are leading this work, we have for our late start Mondays, we have Christy Landshut, who is a science teacher and an instructional coach at South. And then she works closely with Stephanie Beck, who is a librarian at North. Our workshop is designed and facilitated by Nader Najjar, who's here with us tonight, special ed teacher from North. Kim Pekowski, she is the library department chair at South. Moti Pekelny is a social studies teacher at South, and Mary Beth Sensor is a science teacher at South. And then our student programming coming on here is being led by Paula Fernandez, who's here with us tonight, world language teacher at North. Vel Vetri, he's here tonight with us. He's a counselor at South High. Mike Mealy, he is an English teacher at North. And Jennifer Martinez is an administrator at South. So we have some representatives here with us tonight to talk about these 3 different components to give you a better idea of the work that we're doing. So I think we'll have them do their part, and then we'll open it up for any questions that you might have. So first up is Christy.
Thanks, Rob. So as Rob mentioned, Stephanie Beck and I work very closely together to plan the late starts for our Monday morning equity sessions. In the 2018-19 academic year, we dedicated 4 late start Mondays to equity and inclusion. Rob also mentioned that this included all staff who interact with students in some way in our buildings. So staff were sorted into groups of about 20 to 30 staff members, and there were facilitators who led the groups in these late start sessions. The purpose of last year's sessions were primarily focusing on developing tone and trust among staff to establish a foundation for developing more awareness of equity, inclusion, and culturally responsive teaching. this upcoming school year, our plan is to increase the number of late starts dedicated to equity and inclusion. So we'll have 6 late start Mondays for equity and inclusion instead of the 4 that we had this past year. And then we'll also be implementing a tiered system for staff to engage with other staff surrounding equity and inclusion topics. So all of the tiered groups will be focused on cultural systems. So either understanding those cultural systems, navigating them, or transforming them. Next year, staff will also have the opportunity to be led by students during one of those late start sessions, as well as job-alike groups. So we're diversifying the staff that will be meeting together, and hopefully also through that, engaging in deeper conversations surrounding equity, inclusion, and growing comfort levels.
Right.
One more thing.
Sure.
This is really important, actually. Sorry, I wish I had the slide. Wait, no, this isn't it. Our plan for implementing this is also going to reflect our personalized professional development that we're also kind of rolling out next year. So we have booklets for staff that they'll be sort of documenting and reflecting on this journey. And again, that reflects what they'll be seeing with PPL, the personalized professional learning. So we're hoping that that sort of also brings all of this professional development together.
Thanks, Christy. Just a few things to add on to there. As I was talking, I remembered one benefit that I didn't anticipate when I asked for leaders to lead this work, is that we have some crosstown collaboration that never would have existed without this work. So, for example, Christy and Stephanie, through their normal daily jobs, would never have had an opportunity to work with each other and to learn about each other and to find the strengths to build a great program. So they're doing a really great job meeting new people that they've never worked with, but have been in the same organization and leading the work. And then the same thing, too, the way that we assemble our groups for these Late Start Mondays, we do it in a way of trying to get adults who don't usually get the opportunity to interact and to work with each other to be in that room, so that way they can hear different stories and different life experiences, and that can influence their work also. All right, so next up, Nader is going to talk to us about our Deep Equity Workshop that he's helped to design and to facilitate.
Okay, hi. The Deep Equity Workshop last year was offered to all administrators at the ASC in both buildings and the department chairs. And that was important because one of the things it did, we'll start with that blue tone and trust. It built a tone and trust with the other staff members to feel like, hey, we're really all in this together, right? Everyone's in this together from the top down. And it made them feel like this wasn't here we go again. And that's really what tone and trust is about. You know, is this here we go again? Is this something we've done before? Is this something that they might feel defensive or have some resistance about? So in the 4-day workshop, we work on those 5 phases, and tone and trust being the first one. Tone and trust is also important because it's about removing shame and blame and making people feel like we can talk about inequities or things happening in the district, and we're not looking to blame anyone. We're just looking to say, hey, there's work to be done. Let's identify that work and do it. Also, the personal culture and personal journey, when we get to that portion, that's letting staff know that we recognize that staff is also diverse, and staff has its own story to tell, right? There's the student component, but there's also the staff component. And here we get to recognize and honor each other's stories, right? Multifaceted stories, because not everyone just defines themselves by race or culture or language or whatever it might be, but they get to share those different facets of who they are. And when we're able to share those things and really start to go into our own personal culture and personal journey, we start to develop a capacity to work with students in a better way. And then when we go to social dominance and social justice, this is really about talking about, okay, we know there's inequities. How do we start to eliminate those inequities, right? And the way that we want to do it is not to have a student come in and say, well, you have to assimilate to the dominant culture, right? Because back to what like Rob was presenting, we don't want students to give up who they are. We want students to come in and feel comfortable with who they are. And so in this part here, we start to talk about what are the systems that historically have taken place and are currently taking place that are causing these inequities, right? And then maybe we start to look at the education gap, or we start to call it the opportunity gap or the privilege gap, and we start to talk about it like that. And then there's a quote that says, even with interventions, systemic inequities will persist unless addressed consciously and directly. So this is where we start to really talk about what are the inequities that are happening and how could we start to talk about them and address them, right? And then this is where we start to go into the next one, where we start to say, how does this affect my classroom? And how does this affect the students that I work with, even if you're not a teacher in the school? And then when we talk about these school applications, that's where we start to talk about culturally responsive teaching. And this is probably where the bulk of the work is going to happen in the workshop. The first 3 phases are more for building kind of the passion for the work. And then the 4th phase is really like, now we start to talk about conceptual framework to have this work done. And this is where we talk about research-based strategies that teachers can use within the classroom and within the building. And here we bring together all the other initiatives. So it's not about learning something new necessarily, but all the other initiatives that you might have learned in District 99 or in other districts, and we put them together and say, how do we get to work under this umbrella of school applications in equity and inclusion? And then finally, the systemic piece, the systemic change comes when the teacher goes back into that classroom, we bring in the student voice, and now we start to evaluate how we're doing, right? Which is also a part that we are doing as a team. How do we evaluate and measure student outcomes in light of equity and inclusion? So within that 4-day workshop, it's probably the deepest dive that teachers and staff members take, and that's what it looks like in a nutshell.
Thank you, Nader. One other thing about that systemic change piece is also us examining as an organization our policies and procedures that we have in place. So just a preview, in the upcoming years as we continue on this work, we might be bringing some policies for change based on what we uncover through this work. All right, and our next piece, Val Vetri is here to talk to us about the student programming piece, which we're starting this school year.
Yes. And also Paula Fernandez will be,
Paula, I'm
she and I
sorry,
will be
yes,
tag
Paula's also
teaming
here. Thank
quite
you.
a bit here. No worries. So as Rob mentioned earlier, part of our work toward the end of last school year was really starting to acknowledge the importance of the student voice and understanding how we can implement some of the deep equity work with our students in District 99. And so this will be a pretty exciting year because it is very much in the works as we're starting to work with an organization called My Story, My Name, or My Name, My Story. I might have, pardon me. This was a program that was brought to us by Jennifer Martinez, DGS's Director of Student Activities, and it was very helpful to hear her experience of witnessing the program, as well as bringing us feedback from multiple schools. I think my understanding is that you're working with 150 different schools that have utilized the program.
Yeah, from across the nation, who have worked with this organization and had nothing but raving reviews.
And so the foundation of the program will be very empathy-centered work, but also really trying to inspire our students to hear each other's stories, but also create kind of a network of change and understand that we need to be able to hear each other, listen to each other, walk in each other's shoes before we're going to be able to do the work that's required through deep equity. So it's a very parallel process that's taking place with staff, but it's also taking place with our students and hopefully moving toward long-term, growth and change.
Yeah, we couldn't be more excited for this process to begin. I feel like since day one, there have been a lot of people like me asking, well, where are the students? When are we going to get them involved? So we are super excited to see what this year unfolds. So the programming will work with 2 days. My Name, My Story will come for an evening on October 7th to train our trainers. We have 60 students from both campuses. Of those 60 students, our students that are representatives on the Deep Equity team will be part of that group as well. And they will be trained by the My Name, My Story representatives to facilitate and lead discussions surrounding empathy. And then the following 2 days, October 9th at South, or excuse me, October 8th at South and October 9th at North, we will have what's called our Changemaker Days. And that group will multiply very rapidly. We will have 300 students total district-wide who will be trained or involved in empathy-based workshops that will then become our change makers. So they will, the students will lead those workshops. They will lead those discussions. The results that we are looking for at the end are really to identify areas where our school culture and student culture complement each other and where perhaps they diverge, and how we might, from student perspective, how we might address those types of things. So I really love the My Name, My Story idea of using this term change maker, only because it's such a strong word that carries so much weight and a lot of responsibility. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the students rise to the challenge, taking on that responsibility of really improving our school cultures on both ends of town. And we have the District 99 Educational Fund to thank for
Yes.
making this even a possibility to bring in an organization like My Name, My Story. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul and Val. Yes, so that's an important last piece is, as an equity team last year, we kept hearing that students need to be involved in this work, but we all realized we don't know how to start doing something like that. So we were fortunate to find this organization that'll help us this first year to teach us how to do that, give us a framework to work around, and then we can build from there. And we're very fortunate that the Education Foundation has offered to pay for, actually has paid for, the check has been cashed.
It's cleared.
Yes, it's cleared. So they're paying for it to help us to get this foundation, and then from next year on, we'll be able to lead it ourselves now that we'll know how to do that. So I want to thank our educators here tonight coming here to present. They represent some of the leaders of our work, but there are a lot more leaders that I think you should also know about. We have our equity team, which is 20 individuals. These late start Mondays are led in small groups, and so there's about 40 educators, teachers, and support staff that have volunteered to be the facilitators in those rooms. So they're leading the work. We also have this program called SEED, Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. That's a workshop, and so we have staff members that are leading that. So we have a lot of staff members that are leading this work, and I especially want to thank the four of you for coming in and presenting to us. So we're ready for any questions, if anyone has questions for us.
Well, I just want to say that we're very excited to have, I'm on the foundation, so we're very excited to have participated in this but please take pictures and can put it on our website. We would really love to see how our students are reacting to some of these wonderful things, and especially when it's an entire student body or type event. We really can't say enough about how great it is. So, thank you.
We'll make sure it's
Thank
well
you.
documented.
Thank you.
I have one question. First, I must say I'm very enthused about this. It sounds like a wonderful
Thank you.
program. But you mentioned that you're going to have 300 students be leaders. I don't know if it's too early, but how do you go about selecting those students?
Yeah, so our principals are going to be leading that charge. The goal is to find a majority of those students who are influencers within their own friends group or clubs or activities, so that way they can take the work that they learn in that workshop and bring it to whatever sphere of influence they have. We also recognize that there are some students that have valuable perspectives that aren't necessarily involved, and so our challenge is to find those students and to also include those students. But that's going to be difficult.
It is difficult, but I think it's worth doing and
It
shows
is.
more diversity.
Yeah. And I think the biggest challenge we're going to have is these dates are in October, and part of this cohort we want to be our new ninth graders. So we have to very quickly learn who they are and find the ones that would be a good fit for this team.
Well, good luck. It sounds great.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd like to say that I think is very unique about our school district is, I said all of our adults are involved in this work. We are taking an approach that the administrators, who are typically on stage being the leaders, are not the leaders of this work. And so we go into those rooms as learners, and we have other staff that are teaching us. So we try our best to invert that leadership cycle, so that way we're in there as learners and they're leading and teaching us.
I think that's really a great opportunity for our staff, too.
Yeah.
Great opportunity.
I have a couple quick ones.
Yeah.
For the benefit of maybe people watching at home, and for myself, maybe if we could unpack some of the deep equity speak.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like cultural systems.
Yeah.
You know, what does that really mean?
Yeah, so that's very similar to what I referenced on my slide, which is understanding that students and their families have a system of culture. So their norms, their communication methods, their interactions with each other is theirs, and that our buildings, our schools have its own culture, and that culture is created by the adults who are a part of that. And so looking at those two different cultures, and when our students come to our buildings, how are those cultures interacting?
One of the things that strikes me about this whole program is that, maybe this is an oversimplification, but it's a way for us to try to try to conform to our students' culture and their heritage, rather than ask them all to conform to something that we've invented.
Right.
Fair?
I mean, it gets to the heart of our work in the district, which is let's know our students better. So if we can build in time and energy to know our students better, for adults to know each other better, then we can design systems and adjust systems that might not be perfect yet.
So what is culturally responsive teaching?
Yeah.
I mean, how?
Nader, you want to grab this one?
What is that?
Or do you want me to?
Nader taught us, Nader was
Sure.
our instructor this year, so here you go, the
yes.
teacher.
But if you're on the spot, I can take it.
No,
It's
I can
okay.
take it. Something I forgot. Today is my daughter's birthday, and one of my daughters. And one of the workshops I did was actually a week after my son was born. But I think it just goes to show it's not just me, all the leaders. This initiative is just like reinvigorating many teachers and a lot of the staff members, because it's really exciting work. And I think people are willing to take it on. We don't have to. I don't think any of us have to be up here, but people are willing to take it on. So I think that's speaks a lot to this work. I think it's kind of like piggybacking on what Rob said, that culturally responsive teaching is, how do you know your student, and how do you respond to the things they might do or say, right, or act, right? We might perceive a certain student's action as disrespect, whereas culturally they might say that's what respect is for me, right? So a student might say being silent and sitting in the back of the classroom is what I learned is respectful, and a teacher might say that kid never speaks up, I'm not giving him anything for participation, right? So how do we understand our students, and how are we more responsive to their actions or non-actions in reality is what culturally responsive teaching is all about, and constantly adjusting our practices, our lesson plans, our curriculum to make sure that we meet those cultural needs of the students.
Sounds challenging.
It is.
It is.
I was going to ask a little bit about families. Their families, are they going to be included in some way? Because a lot of times you'll have cultural perceptions, like perceptions of time. What's on time, what's not on time. I mean, of course you want to understand their cultures, but also there's a little bit of learning of this culture that's in the school too, and you want a nice blend of it. So I was wondering, are families going to ever be included?
Yeah, so our net is slowly getting larger and larger and larger. So we started with our adults, and now our net is going to our students. But related to that is we're starting to see the snowball effect of the work going into different areas of the organization. So for example, Pete led some pretty major changes within our hiring practices this year. And so we're seeing the work that's typically focused on classroom instruction, but now going into let's look at how we're hiring and the methods that we're using. So my hope is that when we get a handle on the student programming, then we go wider out, and we just, we keep finding people to help lead the work, because it's a lot of work, and it's very challenging work, yeah.
Yeah, creating a culture is huge.
Right.
Wonderful. So thank you.
Any other questions?
Good work.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your last few summer days. Yeah, what's left of them, right?
Good going.
Shift around here. I think our next item on the agenda is field trips and educational tours. Dr. Thiele.
Field trips and educational tours. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Sicardi.
Okay. I don't know where the clicker went, but maybe the clicker's not working anyway. So
We
I'm
have
gonna-
Tony, who needs a clicker.
Tony, can you be my clicker? Thank you. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about student tours. Embedded in that and going even larger than that to talk about student trips in general. So as we look at the types of student trips, our board policy. We're good, Tony? Oh. It's trying. Okay, thank you. Sorry. I guess I'm in a hurry. Our board policy spells out 3 different types of student trips. The first 2, obviously very similar, field trips. So those field trips as well as extended field trips, and then educational tours, which we usually refer to as student tours. So talk a little bit about field trips first. Our field trips essentially are broken down into 2 different types. I'll just continue, I guess. So extended field trips basically take place outside the school environment. They're typically, students are missing no more than 1 day of school. Oftentimes, it's like a weekend trip, so Friday, Saturday. And they require an overnight stay of 1 or 2 days. They typically do not extend to a 3rd day. When we get to a 3rd day, then that's when we typically refer to that as an educational or a student tour. So some examples of extended field trips, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, oftentimes can be things like speech competitions, different performances, festivals. Typically, our fine arts department, many of you are familiar with Snowball, different weekend trips that clubs and activities might take, different types of competitions and camps that could fall through activities or athletics. But those are just some examples. There's numerous types of extended field trips. Those are just some of the more common ones that you might be familiar with. In terms of the criteria, so the field trip criteria, now these are for single day, not the extended. Typically they occur during the school day. They could even be an in-school type field trip, but they occur during the school day. They require 1 or more periods absent from class on a given day. Typically those are falling within the school day, but they don't always fall within the school day. It could be that students don't come back until 6 at night or something like that. But they do not include an overnight. So they're not going somewhere for any type of overnight activity. So some examples of those are, museum visits, college visits. We get a lot of that coming through different programs, not just our counseling and student support services, but through AVID as well. Different performances, leadership activities. Sometimes it relates to, like in our science classes, where we extend the learning beyond the classroom and actually go to different locations. It could be conventions that occur that are activity-based, or conferences that are for students and particularly for student leaders. So those are just some examples of some of the different field trips that we often see.
Gene, are those typically approved at the department chair level, or do they ever reach up to your level?
So they are typically approved by the building.
Oh, principals? Okay.
Or representative. And it's a little bit different in each building. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's site-based as opposed to district. So some overall purposes, obviously, is to extend learning beyond the classroom, to have an experience that's different than we can provide in the classroom, an authentic experience. They build upon the curriculum or the activity or the club or athletics, depending on what the situation might be. The idea is that it should enhance student learning in a way that it complements the experiences students are having. It could be experiential in nature. It could involve a competition, like our students competing against their peers. And you often hear about our students going to different competitions. And in some cases, it might expose our students to post-secondary options.
And that could be through counseling student support services, that could be through the chamber with our Attainable Futures program. There's lots of examples of how that occurs in different ways. So the approval process is site-based. It does occur a little bit differently in each building. It's sort of interesting. And I met with both the administrators on each end of town that oversee it to kind of talk through, so I would have a better understanding of what's in common, because there have been some recent changes, very recent changes. But both have a clear process. There's a clear process for teachers, coaches to follow. There's multiple steps. Certainly, we try to limit the absences from class. What can we do to limit the number of days, in terms of extended field trips, or periods that a student is absent? We certainly try to limit costs, and that could be in a number of ways. There could be group discounts, for example. It could be transportation. So can we use one of our minibuses versus taking a large school bus, or even two in some cases, if we have two teachers going and, 24 students, something like that. Both buildings have blackout dates where there's no field trips allowed, like before those kinds of things. But we do approve, or the buildings do, I should say, approve some exceptions, especially when it comes to like competitions. When our students are going different, like Skills USA, DECA, those kinds of things. We can't always control the timing of those. Okay. So costs, field trip costs can include a lot of different things. It depends on the field trip. So there could be entrance fees, like with museums, or registration fees, transportation. Field trips also include in that substitute pay for the teachers, obviously, to be out of class, sometimes food, meals, and there can be other costs. It just depends. Every field trip is so different. So we certainly have to look at what those costs are and always try to mitigate it. We fund field trips in a number of different ways. Typically, they are funded by the student or the family. But there are some exceptions. Not all of them are. So some experiences are provided with grant funds. So we use, for example, some of our CT grant funds to cover different field trip type learning experiences. Some are, or I shouldn't say some, expenses are waived for students who receive a fee waiver. So those costs to the museum or whatnot are waived for those students. Meals are provided for any students who receive reduced or free lunch. And then there are other exceptions, and that's just on a case-by-case or programmatic basis. And some of those programmatic examples could be AVID. In some cases I can use, in some, not all, but in some cases I can use grant funds to cover different AVID experiences. Or for our English learners, our English language learners, we can cover those through some other vehicles as well. So transitioning to what I often refer to as student tours, educational tours are a little bit different. The criteria is set through board policy. They are to occur outside of the school environment. They should extend at least 72 hours and require at least a 2-night stay. We make every effort to limit the time out of class or absences, student absences from class, and they do require board approval. And they come to the district. So field trips do not come to me. Student tours obviously come to my office. Student tours can be very different, and every tour is different. As the board has certainly seen with the paperwork that I submit for your approval, the purpose behind each, the rationale behind each, the experiences a student have can vary very widely from each. Some are involved in clinical experiences. Those tend to be more in the fine arts area. It could be participating or attending a performance. And that doesn't always have to be even in fine arts. That could be attending a performance that's some kind of play or opera, something like that. It could involve interacting with professionals in the field. The next one is somewhat unique in terms of legislative or civic-based experiences. That typically refers to our close-up, which has been going on for North High for a very long time, where students go on pretty much a week-long experience. It could be immersion into the culture, the art, the history, architecture, climate, terrain of a region or country. And that's where a lot of ours that come out of world languages, like our German exchange, our Costa Rica trip, which comes out of sciences, but not necessarily as a science trip. The process is a little bit different. So the teacher, there's a proposal form that the board has seen. The teacher completes that, they forward it to the associate principal, who consults with them, and kind of guides them through the process, helps them to understand it. Those proposals, when approved by the associate principal, are then forwarded to my office. I review the proposal, I consult with the associate principal, and/or the teachers as necessary. And a lot of times, the communication is directly to the teacher. And oftentimes, the teacher will reach out, and quite often, I'll know it before the proposal form's even completed, where I'll get an email or someone will reach out as I'm walking the halls and say, oh, I'm thinking about proposing a tour. And then, obviously, once I approve it, I bring it to the board for recommendation and for formal approval by the Board of Education. So just a little bit of history. I just did, the last 3 years and then started to look at this year. On the number of tours that have been proposed, the tours that have occurred on one or more school days. Sometimes it's just a couple of periods within a school day. And then the total days missed. And I put estimated because oftentimes these tours, to mitigate the cost, we oftentimes will propose a tour a year and a half out, right? Because the sooner that we lock in, the better rate we get. And so oftentimes when they're filling out the proposal, it's still estimated. You've seen in some of the tours, I'll even put like a date range, for example. Or it'll depend on flights, if they're flying. So it is estimated. Especially I'm looking at this year, estimated. So in 16-17, which was a bit of an anomaly, and I went back and even checked that as late as last Thursday because I thought I had calculated it incorrectly. We, pretty much all of our tours involved 1 or more days being out of school. Some of those tours were, for example, when our band went to perform at the Disney World Parade, the Thanksgiving. I believe it was the Thanksgiving parade. So those are just some examples. Close Up is another tour that you can see every year. We pretty much send students to Close Up, and that typically involves 4 days out of school. And those dates are set somewhat by the organization, and there's dates that you can select or pick. Once in a while, it will fall over spring break, but we have heard pretty clearly from students that oftentimes they have family plans over spring break. And so that can sometimes be a problem. But as you can see, in most years, not all of our tours involve school days, and we already have quite a few tours approved for this upcoming year. When I say year, I mean ending June 30th. Many of those are summer, and right now, only 1.25 days. But Close Up has not come forward for this year. That is the only tour that pretty much every year we're looking at days missed out of school. And then in terms of mitigating the cost, I kind of already mentioned this a little bit before, but we do some comparison pricing. That's not to say that every year we compare pricing. Oftentimes when we have worked with a company and we've researched it many times, we will stay with that company. We certainly do not want to give up quality. Sometimes it's about what services they can provide in terms of security, in terms of where their offices are located, and are there supports in the country that we're going to be in. They're on the ground support. We consider the length of the tour to hopefully mitigate some of the cost, and the mode of transportation. Some of our tours that are the least expensive is when we're traveling by bus. And sometimes that ends up leading to us needing more time to get to the destination, which can result in missing a day of school or some periods. We look at different types of lodging, the dates. Sometimes the dates that you select can change it by literally hundreds of dollars, and then what the options are in terms of the itinerary. When I'm saying exploring commitment timelines, when do we need to commit to get the best price? And how does that change as we move forward? And that's something that our teachers are really good about that. Trying to make sure that we're planning far enough out in advance so that we can get the best price. The funding of tours is primarily student and family funded. We certainly work with companies to try and get the best payment plans that we can get. Pretty much most of the companies have payment plans. We certainly encourage students to think about different ways of funding it for themselves. So, instead of asking for various presents for Christmas or for a holiday, a birthday or something, gifts to come in that way. And we do have times where there are informal donations. Sometimes that goes through the family, and sometimes it comes out in other ways, where a family will pay for another, or partially pay for another student in the program. We typically do not fundraise for our tours, or field trips for that matter. So it's just a little bit about how the tours work, as well as our field trips and how they are different. Do you have any questions?
So just question going, and you don't have to go back, but going back to field trip costs, so not tour, but field trip costs. Is it really necessary for us to charge the families for substitute coverage of teachers? I mean, if we make a decision that these field trips are educationally sound for our students to go, or they're competing and we think it's a good thing for our students to go, shouldn't the district be covering the cost of the substitute instead of the teachers?
And in some cases we do. In many cases we do. It varies. And in some cases, we don't even have a teacher who's going on the trip. It might be a counselor or someone who doesn't have classes. So it really varies on the trip.
Why would it vary?
Yeah, I mean, I think varying
Like
would open
college-
ourselves up to more.
So like college
staff member
visits,
that's going.
if you don't have classes, you don't need a substitute. In most cases, I shouldn't say that. But
if we
in
have
most cases,
But
you
if we
would
have a
need.
staff member that is teaching a class, we charge this.
By board policy, we're required to.
Okay, so my question then is for the board, and to me, that does not seem like that's not a policy I support. I would support changing that policy.
We would have to figure out what the cost would be and then what the impact on the overall budget would be. We can investigate that and bring it back to the policy committee, but it would come at a significant cost to the overall budget to make that change.
I'd like to see the policy committee consider that as well.
So in some cases, just so you know, and I know I put on the one slide and we don't need to go back, but exceptions, so sometimes I fund the sub out of a grant too. So it just varies.
Yeah.
Each one is so different, it's hard to say, every time it's this or that. It just depends on the experience. And even sometimes with in-school field trips, which are not that common, but when those do occur, sometimes it's just covered internally. It's just, we make arrangements where it's not bringing in a substitute teacher necessarily, or limiting bringing in a sub.
I'll bring it to a future policy committee.
What does the district pay a substitute teacher? Is it 95, 110, 115?
105.
105, okay.
Any other questions or comments about? I was glad to see this on the agenda. This is something I wanted to talk about as well, particularly the educational tours. My concern primarily is cost to the families. And sometimes the tours that are chosen are quite costly. And by virtue of that cost, exclusionary to some students. And that troubles me to some degree. So I don't know how we kind of move forward with this conversation, but I'd like to have more conversation about that. Whether or not that's, those sorts of tours are necessarily the best choice, if there aren't other things that could be done that maybe are less cost, but might have an equal educational benefit. I know we do our best to, students with fee waivers, that sort of thing, we do our best to help that way, but it's a burden on families, I think, regardless of financial standing. And the other piece of it is that one of the things that's troublesome to me is not just that some students might get left out who, can't afford to go, but the fact that you have some that get to and some that don't creates a dynamic there that I don't think is, even in the spirit of some of the deep equity conversations we had this evening earlier. So that's something I'd like to see looked at a little bit more in depth rather than, so I don't know how we go about that in the future, but that's.
And I share your concerns, Mike. I don't have an answer. I don't have a proposal. It's just, the inequities of some people getting to go, some people not. I just think we need to, and maybe it's just as us as a board, when these educational tours come up, sometimes I feel like we approve them, we don't really discuss them, we don't really discuss some of the educational benefits. And I would really want to make sure that for any ones that we approve, that we at least have a pretty clear discussion on what the benefit is for the students as we approve these moving forward.
Also, it seems to me that there ought to be some expectation of a level of participation too. And I don't know what that level has been typically, and it probably varies.
Well, and what it seems as though you're isolating a certain type of tour. To me, it sounds like you guys are talking about our band programs and our music programs, which are different types of tours than like our language or the science ones or whatever. I mean, those are very different types of programs than the others. And without saying it, I feel like that's the programs you're isolating on, which are programs, as a former band director, I can tell you.
Well, we had a thing with DECA, though. We have an article, didn't we get emailed of a parent who had to pay for the DECA trip, and it was like $700-800?
No, it was about a field trip, and they didn't think it was right that they had to pick up the cost of
The substitute teacher.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
That's what it was.
I knew there was something.
Yeah.
But with the band trip, it's kind of a double edge in the choir and those types of performing arts types of trips. There is an expectation amongst families that participate in those programs that there will be those types of things offered. And that they will be offered at a particular level that is on par with what other students in the Chicago suburbs are experiencing. And with those expectations comes a certain level of a trip. So you're always competing against the things that you're bringing up right now about cost, experience, how educational is it versus entertainment. I mean, all of those things are things that our directors have to balance out. But there is also the expectation among students and parents that these things happen on a frequent basis, and there are certain kids that participated in a program only to go on those trips. And as a former band director, you will see your program ebb and flow as those things happen. So if you have a trip that happens every 3 years, come that third year, your program is going to be the biggest as it is, and the next year, your program is going to be the smallest that it is, because there are a certain number of kids that are participating so that they can go on those types of trips. So those things are all factors that our professionals are balancing as they put these together and bring them to you. I would encourage you, though, as these trips come to you as a board, know that we have done that work behind the scenes. But if there's something that stands out that you have a concern about, you want addressed more clearly, as you receive those, let us know, and we're always happy. I know board members over the last couple of years have pointed out things that they had concerns about. We'll always track that down and try to explain what the rationale was.
And I appreciate seeing the process you go through for some of those. So I didn't realize it was quite as extensive as it is, and that actually gives me pretty good comfort level that we are doing the right things. I didn't realize what that process is, so I do appreciate you bringing that tonight. Thank you.
I wonder, so the presumption that we have students that are expecting to do these things, I wonder how true that is. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a kid in band. I don't know. I have a,
You're absolutely.
I have a
It's
kid. in-
expected.
It's
So,
expected.
so for instance,
I've been-
if we go with the London trip,
France,
that your,
Germany,
your student went on.
all over people.
What was the level of participation on that London trip? Do we have any idea what, as a,
Yeah.
Yeah, Janice wanted to say.
Almost everybody.
I look that way.
It was almost everybody.
Percentage, but I would say there was more than 80%.
That's excellent.
We tend to get around 80% is what I keep hearing, that is kind of the threshold. And that doesn't mean that the students that don't go do not go necessarily because of cost. There could be a multitude of reasons,
Don't
right?
want to go or have other obligations or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I'm
Family.
involved in a
80%
sport that
seems-
competes with that.
But that's what I've
yeah.
heard when I've asked.
Yes, yeah, like, because you can't perform. I mean, if they don't break,
Right.
that high of a percentage, they're not going to be able to perform. And so, yeah, it was about that.
And you're right, Hank. I mean, the last year at North, the band program was like 215 kids or something because, I'm not saying because of the London trip, but I'm sure, I don't know what the
Helps
numbers.
bolster your numbers.
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers are this year, but I'm guessing it's probably down a little from
There were
250.
several kids that dropped after.
Yeah.
I will just say my nephew was in band and not in this district, and the expectation was that they went on
Yeah.
trips. And that was one of the reasons why he joined it, which was, maybe not the best reason, but he ended up staying with it, which was awesome.
And I think a lot of our teachers do a really good job of planning in advance. So the choir tour is every other year.
Yeah.
The students expect it every other year.
They know it's coming.
They know it's coming. The parents know it's coming. That's not to say that, it's still costly, there's no doubt, but at least they know what the timeline is. Sometimes with some of the others, not necessarily, because it's by invitation that, the band's invited. So that's a little bit different too.
But they usually get a little, pre-notice that they're going to be invited to.
Oh, yeah.
Like London. I mean, they didn't get it the
Year-
week.
it was a
They
year
didn't
and a
get it.
half
They didn't
for
get it the
London.
week before.
Yeah,
and
they
say,
don't, no.
oh, by the way, can you go to London next week? I mean, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It was at least a year and a half for London.
Yeah, so you get that, but also some of those costs, are they offset by the Friends of the Fine Arts? I thought they did.
I met with many people to ask the same question, because I actually thought they did too, and they said no. Now, there's a lot of, from what I understand, families, very generous families that do contribute, but it's not necessarily through the organization. So I want to contribute to make sure that other students can partake, so.
Okay.
Make a
I was under
contribution.
that assumption, so I'm glad you clarified that, because I thought,
But it's still families who are being,
but didn't they
Generous.
pick up parts of like the instruments being sent over and stuff like that?
they may do some part of that isn't actually tacked into the student cost.
I
but
think
I'm
I may be wrong, Janice, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Friends of Fine Arts actually contributed to just the London trip example. Of the kids, the last night of the trip went to Les Mis.
Oh,
And that was funded by the Friends of Fine
Nice.
Arts.
So that was in
So that
addition
did-
to.
That was an addition to the tour at no cost to any of the participants. So that was a wonderful
Yeah.
conclusion for everybody on that trip, and that was part of the.
Yeah.
Okay,
So there may be
that's-
those exceptions,
Yes.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Which keeps the
Just-
costs off the families, which is
Yeah,
one great
it's fantastic.
organization.
Yeah, because that could be, $80, $100,
Yeah.
a piece.
Well, my only concern was one of, inclusion and making sure that, and to be clear, I don't have a groundswell of people coming up to me saying this is a problem.
but these are good
So this is
questions to ask.
So, but it was something that has been on my mind for a little while now, actually. So I'm glad we had the discussion and
Yeah, we just hope you
maybe,
better understand the processes
yes,
through this
definitely.
presentation.
And if policy could take a look at the student teaching cost aspect of that. I
We'll
think
start
that's
working
just-
on what the actual cost is.
That'd be great. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to the district goals.
So last month when we met, I provided you the yearly document that is the end-of-year summary, which talked about what we accomplished last year, highlights,
Yep.
what's set up to be next year, and then over the last month, we've taken that narrative and broken it into this list of goals. I'm not going to read them to you. I have provided them to you in print, but this is just to put it out there that you have them. They will come back to you on August 19th for formal approval. We'll start sharing these with like leadership team or chairs this week. The whole administrators have all helped develop these. Actually, I think our chairs saw these via email a few weeks ago. We'll talk about them on Friday. On the opening day when the staff comes back, we share this with them, especially some big highlights around them. This really sets up all of our work for the rest of the year. Gina and I, with Ed and Janice, met this morning and started talking about how our opening messages to all of our staff connect back to this work. So it kind of has a cascading effect through the whole organization. That being said, if there is something in here that you as a board member feel is missing or feel is not represented yet that you feel it should be, remember you have up until the 19th, well, not on the 19th, that'd be bad, but kind of the week before the 19th. So you have about another week or so. If you go through this and you feel like we haven't addressed something, you can email me and Nancy, or reach out to us and say you feel like something's lacking here so we can tweak that before we bring it for final approval August 19th. And then those are kind of our marching orders for the year. And you've seen now kind of this cycle that we work through here. With this setting up our work for the year, we report out on this to the board. The public doesn't see that as much, but the board gets regular updates on the progress of these goals. And then we give the year-end report on how we did. And then repeat again, and it starts all back up again. Just a reminder, in the next couple of years, once we finish our facility projects, we'll do a more larger scale strategic plan that will look further out.
MFP2.
Yeah, right. Well, it'll be time to kind of start that. But beyond the master facility plan, whatever else we should be looking at. But so far, we feel like this has been an opportunity. You look in domain 5 is future focus, and that is where we put the things that people bring us that we know we can't tackle necessarily this year, but we can get started on that and build it into the future. So it is a way of strategic planning, but a little different way. And it's been working for us. So get anything to Nancy and I over the next week if you'd like to see any changes in that. Okay. Master facility plan bid progress?
Okay, just I'll let you know we had 2 bids, July 23rd and July 25th. I'll be bringing those results to you probably at the business meeting here in August, if not definitely in September. So those were 2 of the final of Phase B bid outs. We also have an upcoming bid in August. We haven't had secured a date yet. That'll be for the squad rooms for the bleachers. So pretty much wrapping up Phase B. This in front of you on the board is the results of the July 3rd bid for Phase B. 28 bids, about $5.5 million worth of work. Steel, masonry, roofing, the big stuff. So what we've seen in this bid and then the 2 bids that they give you just kind of a pre of what came in a week or so ago, we're seeing better numbers. So that's promising to me, especially the 23rd and the 25th. We saw some really good numbers. These are really good numbers. So as we start bidding out Phase B in its entirety, I think we're going to see, once we get back to the budget and show you that in the upcoming months, that we're not really tackling into our contingency like we thought we had with some of the market that was out there with high bids. So pretty good here. It's good competition and good numbers. Pretty happy with the results of this one, and you'll see good results of the other 2 when I bring that to you as well.
So it's trending the way we expected. We knew that the early ones were going to be higher because of the timing and everything else.
Yep.
Now that we're at the point where we're further ahead of the project, the numbers are starting to trend the way we had hoped.
Great.
Are we going to make up ground? From the high?
Yeah, well, we had budgeted and planned on it working that way. So we never really fell too far behind. We did have some adjustment of where we thought some of the budgeting would be spent because we actually picked up in Phase A this summer some of the projects that we expected would happen in B and C, but it made sense to do them now as we got into some of the spaces and to set up future work. But it's looking good right now,
Yeah.
budget-wise.
Are we going to be where we wanted to be when school starts?
So master facility
Next-
plan
that's-
progress.
Good
Next up.
good segue. Next item on the agenda.
Nice segue there.
Nice segue. Well done.
Overall, I think yes. Overall, we have a couple of spaces where it's going to be tight, and there might be some areas where there's some rough finishes left to be done for the start of school. I think at South, the front entrance, we're going to still have part of that area.
Windows in?
Yeah, windows are in.
Well, no.
Most places, yeah.
There was some.
And one half. The other half, they're getting there.
Air conditioning doesn't work too well without them.
Well, it does, but you're just air conditioning the outside. Yeah.
It still works.
Yeah.
Wow.
So at South, they started putting down the turf. Started yesterday and going in today, so that's starting to look much better. Concrete work around the front of South is progressing pretty well. The canopy is really, they've made up some ground on that over the last couple of weeks. There will still be some locations around the front of South where landscaping isn't done or some work isn't done. There'll still be some fencing up and those kinds of things as we finish that work off to start the year. Probably some rough edges around the area around the artificial turf space as we finish that up. But otherwise, offices are starting to get furniture in them.
We've got a few secretarial spaces that we're still waiting for casework, but if it comes, it shouldn't take that long.
Yeah. Culinary arts labs are looking really nice. They got casework in there, they have tile in there, appliances go in later this week.
Flooring starts.
Flooring tomorrow, and then appliances go in. Those spaces look amazing. Yeah, they look really good. That's pretty much it. And South has done a nice job of recapturing some space as well, and got an additional office that we didn't think you were going to get, and so it's gone well. So on target there. Over at North, we're like the second, third floor classrooms, or second floor classrooms, third floor classrooms are turned back over to the school at this point. The front entrance is done, and the foundation bricks were laid back down today. So that'll be open tomorrow when students return for any of the packet pickup or any materials that they've got to come in to finish registration. The secure vestibule part is on track for the start of the school year. Moving around to the back side of the building, CMG is in their offices. That space is up and going. The loading dock is operational. The back side of the loading dock, that will be after the start of the school year that gets done. Since that is more of making it look pretty rather than function, that has been held off. I have been contacted by a couple of the neighbors there asking like, come on, can't we get this done? And I let them know that, we're getting it done, but it might go a few weeks after the school year starts. But we're in good communication with them to let them know what's going on. And if you drive by there and you see the new stairwell, you'll see that their view is so much better than it used to be. It's gorgeous. It really takes the ugliest side of our building, and it's starting to become a nice side of our building there. What other spaces am I forgetting, Janice?
Multi-needs.
Oh, multi-needs, yeah. Some great new classroom improvements. And radio TV is lagging a little bit. Yeah, that was quite a project to take on.
Impressive, though.
It's impressive. We're probably going to have one of the nicest TV radio studios in the country. It's going to be beautiful when it's done, but that was very technical in putting that together. We've been in close communication with the teacher. He knows what to expect when he comes back and knows that might have to adjust some of the beginning of the year, first week lessons, but that's 1 week for a lifetime of a great space. So he's very understanding of what we're doing in there. So he's been very involved through the whole process. Otherwise.
We are in crunch time, though.
Yes.
Just want to let everybody know
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
It's rapid fire. We're trying to hustle and turn over spaces to the school. We still have cleaning and waxing and getting prepared for students to come in. We do have our ROE walkthroughs Thursday for occupancy for both campuses. So that's Thursday morning. I want to thank Mike and Dan for touring with me last Tuesday and Wednesday. So you had an opportunity to walk with me, and it was great, and got a different perspective of how you see things. Really, the radio room is the one that, it'll be a space that we can use, but operational wise, it's just a classroom to start off with. We have a ton of equipment going in. We had some late asbestos that we had to remove from that space, so that got pushed back a little bit. Out of all of the spaces, that's one that's really a little more behind than the rest. But it is crunch time. I mean, the turnover, we have dates that we're turning over to the schools for each space within the schools, and wrapping that up by the 15th, a lot of it being done by the 12th. But the front entrance and the canopy at South and, landscaping, things of that nature, same with North, the front entrance, so, sorry, Janice.
No, I was just saying the demolishing of the classrooms too upstairs. Though.
Yes, that's, Phase B work is being done already at North.
And South.
And at South, especially the electrical work for the transformer at South. So we're getting ahead of the game for this second piece. The noise level with the demo of the 2 stories over at North is happening now, so it doesn't happen during the school year. So trying to
South for
ahead of the game.
And at South, they're getting ready for the addition there, and they're working on the foundation work, which is actually some very loud drilling that they have to do. They're going to get that done before school starts. So they've been very conscientious of that. It's been impressive to see all of this.
Yeah, I would say in the tour, a lot of great work's been done. I mean, the schools are very dirty. It's a lot of impressive work to be done, a lot of work to do. But what I was most impressed about, and I forget everybody's names from White that walked around with us, as we were walking through the areas, they weren't talking about the construction, they were talking about the impact on the students.
Yes.
They were talking about, this is what it's going to be like for the kids. This is how it's going to be better for the kids. Every single conversation we had with anybody from White, it was all about the student experience and how to, we know there's going to be areas, we know there's going to be impacts for students at both schools over the next couple of years, but the level of concern they had for minimizing those impacts of what they're doing now, to your point, the foundation work there, starting construction inside, demolition inside, that impressed me the most. I left both schools feeling these projects are in great hands with White, so great partners to work with. So it was a very impressive tour. Thanks for setting it up, Jim.
Agreed.
Mike, anything from your tour you want to add?
So echo Dan's comments. It's all going really well. It is crunch time, so I admit to being a little nervous about that, but I'm probably not as nervous as you guys are, since it's your responsibility. So, just to be clear.
Notice I didn't join in the conversation.
Really going well. Architecturally, things coming out. I mean, even exceeding my expectations, which that doesn't happen with me very often. I'm not, all I can tell you as an architect, usually things come out the way I envision them, and things are really going well here. I'm really impressed with administrative offices at South. That's kind of where things were even, I thought, that's just going to be unbelievable. The way that's all going to function is going to make the past seem like a nightmare, really. So just wonderful. I forget what we call at South when our freshmen come in next week.
Mad Dash.
Mad Dash, yeah. So what are in North we have a similar, so what are how are things affected with those 2 events?
They know that the hallways need to be clear for Saturday. Work's still going to be going Saturday in those areas, but the hallways will be clear. I met with the student leaders. We talked about the temporary hallway in the A. They're going to show the freshmen, and we talked to the student leaders about, don't show the kids the way you've established your
Right.
routines. Teach them the way we want them to use these other stairwells, because they don't know any different. So we've already had those conversations with the student leaders and stuff, but contractors know everything's out of the halls. On Saturday, they'll still be working, so they might have a toolbox in the hall or things, but the kids are used to that already.
In North?
You know, we're fortunate in that our construction is really very centralized in one location, and that's not a place where typically our students would be going down a lot, so we'll be fine.
All right.
And ours is on Monday, the 12th.
Something I didn't realize in the design that maybe I was aware of and I've forgotten, but the life skills areas at the two high schools. At South, we have a shower there, but at North, we do not. And I'm
I'm in
wondering,
love with that.
so wondering what,
Based upon the communication from the staff, the input that the White received for the needs at each building, South requested it and North did not.
okay.
I don't know those reasons why, but that was something that South wanted in their multi-needs, and North did not.
Is that, I don't know,
It was, you know, they both saw what was happening at both sides of town. So
Okay.
they would have had the opportunity, should they have felt that that was a programmatic need.
I think we saw that the proximity at North to the athletic lockers and showers was
Okay.
a point that might have, for the few times that they need that.
that makes a load of sense, actually. It does. Yes.
But the staff were very, as you know,
Yes.
very
I do- that-
closely involved in the design and implementation of these spaces.
So
So
that's why I prefaced, it's maybe it might have even been in an earlier discussion, and
Yeah.
I've forgotten from our MFP planning. Yeah, and then, safety on day one is, obviously a big concern. So, and especially there at North, I was a little concerned about the narrow pipeline coming in off the west side. But apparently our architects figured out this is what we need in terms of exiting and such, so. But I'm sure it'll be interesting those first few days. There'll be things that'll crop up that we didn't anticipate, and, but I'm sure we'll deal with them well.
that's every school year, though.
Right. No difference there. And then the busing at both the schools too, is there any, how is that going to be all ready? The parking lot, how we're
Yeah.
changing things around, that's all ready
Parking
to
lot will
go?
be all ready to go south. It looks rough now, but
Yeah.
that's like one of the last things that they're going to do, because they don't want any of the construction traffic or contractors driving over the brand-new parking lot,
Yeah.
right? So that'll be one of the last things to go in at South. At North, it's all contained to that one corner, so
It's more just about making sure that the kids are directed in and not in the construction area. So we spent some time talking about where the fence is and, all that kind of stuff, but they got it all figured out.
Wonderful, good. So, no, well done. Thank you for taking us on the tour, and other board members, if you
Yeah, if
haven't,
anybody wants to go, let us know.
You go see it before, before all the kids are in there, and, if you can. It's
Just reach out to
it's
them, we'll find a
impressive.
time.
It's impressive, and it's fun to see all the things that we've been dreaming about starting to come to reality. So, always fun.
Can I just add, we had commented about White, and they have been doing a great job, but Jim has done a tremendous amount of work this summer at both schools. And he's at the construction meetings, he's at North all the time, I'm sure he's at South all the time. And so I just want to help.
Because he's at North all the time.
That's
great. Because it's been on vacation all summer.
I just want to publicly say that Jim has been a phenomenal aid in helping oversee everything. And it makes me feel much more comfortable knowing that he's talking with everybody at White daily. So I think our construction company has been fantastic. I think that our own people, Jim, our Ken, Michelle, I'm sure the same people at South, it's really been a great team effort, so it's been nice to watch.
Well, it's nice to hear from White that we feel that they're very professional, but they feel that our team is very professional as well. That they keep commenting on how little drama there is in District 99 in comparison to other districts that they've worked with. That the focus is just, let's solve the problem, let's do what we need to do, let's get to the outcome. Let's not worry about, blame or what might have happened or whose fault. Here, we have a problem in front of us, let's solve it. And I think that has helped us a great deal, that everybody's just focused on the outcome. Let's make it best for students, and how do we get there?
Well, let's say, Jim, I mean this as a compliment as well as our whole staff. None of this is surprising to me. And I suspect fellow board members feel the same. I mean, this is what we've come to expect, this sort of exceptional leadership, thoughtful planning. So thank you all, especially your work here, Jim. So moving on, recommendations for action.
Before you go
Yes.
to take any kind of vote here, I just want to highlight when we get to 5B, it's that time of year where once we submit a document to you guys, we then have some hires that took place. So there were 2 additional names added to the appointments certified, and that is Jerry Smolek will be a new T99 teacher, and Michelle, I think she says Muir, will be a part-time English teacher at North. So those were all signed since we put the documents out on Thursday.
All right. Very good. So for the first item, we need a motion for the Board of Education to accept the tentative budget for 2019-20 for display purposes and establish 6:45 p.m. September 16th, 2019 in the Administrative Service Center Community Room for the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All right, moved and second. Can we have a roll call?
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Mike Davenport.
Aye. Motion carries. Second item is for a motion for approval of personnel reports. 1, transfer of position certified, appointments certified. 2, resignation certified, resignations classified. And 3, termination classified. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Can we have a roll call, please?
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
And Mike Davenport.
Aye. Motion approved. We'll move on to item number 6, reception of visitors. We didn't have any before. Do we have any? I don't see any new visitors here. So, okay, so we'll close that, and I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second motion.
Moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.